look at this beautiful sky that we have here today. And I just couldn't pass up today to show you how to use an external intervalometer on your digital SLR or your mirrorless. Now, I've already done a tutorial on shooting time lapses with the inbuilt intervalometer on the Z6 II. You can also find on the Z6, the Z7, the Z7 II, the Nikon ZFC and the Nikon Z50. So today's video is how to shoot a time lapse if you don't have that feature. Now, I used to have a D7000, a D7100, a D5500, a D750. All these cameras had an inbuilt intervalometer, but I found that it was very unpredictable. Sometimes the inbuilt intervalometer would just shut off. So I got used to shooting time lapses with an external intervalometer. They are the most reliable. If you get one that doesn't plug into the camera that you can walk away from, be careful because it only transmits a certain distance. So this is the drawback of them. And I've been bitten a few times by forgetting about this, walking away, and then the intervalometer stops working because it stopped talking to the camera. So I prefer just to have one that connects to the camera. You can buy these on eBay for around $15 to $25. No need for the really expensive ones. I've found whether they're cheap or expensive, they've only got a certain lifespan. So I choose something around $20 odd. And I'll put a link in the description, all the gear that I'm using. So you can see I've set up my camera to face the setting sun. We should have some beautiful colors at sunset, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to shoot a time lapse from now, which is around 5:30 to around 7 o'clock at night. I don't have the time at the moment to go away and to sit down for a couple of hours and just watch the sunset. The first thing you want to do is set up your camera. You need a stable tripod. That's the most important thing. I don't want too much of the foreground here. Really what I want is most of the sky and around maybe a quarter of my foreground here. The foreground and your background, that all depends where you are. If you've got a beautiful beach and you know that the colors are going to be nice, you're going to have more. Most of the time we really like the sky. Before we get onto the little intervalometer, we've got the gear. You've got to have your camera set up the way you want it. I'm shooting with a full frame 17 to 35mm lens. Now, something you have to be mindful of is when we take photos, we're taking photos in 6x4 format. A time lapse, when you've rendered it either in Adobe Lightroom or in Adobe Lightroom and LRT time lapse, it's being cropped at 9x16. We want to be an aperture priority. We want to have the ISO set to auto. Choose your white balance. I prefer to choose natural auto. On the Z6 cameras, natural auto is the best one. You can choose auto if you want. Most of the time when we shoot time lapses, we're shooting them in RAW because you're going to be editing your photos. You're not going to be just shooting JPEGs for a time lapse because you're wanting the best possible image. So make sure you're in RAW, make sure that your camera is set to auto ISO and you're in aperture priority mode. Your aperture, what do you want? We're going from a day to night time lapse. So I've set my aperture to f8. The shutter speed is going to be controlled by the camera. It's on auto ISO, but the auto ISO, I've capped it at ISO 4000. My minimum shutter speed is 1 second. So the way it works with aperture priority, auto ISO, my minimum shutter speed of 1 second is when it gets to 1 second, then that's where the auto ISO kicks in and it will keep climbing until it gets to your cap of, for us today, ISO 4000. Once it gets to ISO 4000, then the shutter speed will drop because you've told the camera, don't go above ISO 4000. So the camera will not go above ISO 4000, and the only way in aperture priority that it can keep the aperture correct is reducing your shutter speed. We've taken care of white balance, we've taken care of all the settings. The one thing that is so important, what you want is to make sure that the camera, your horizon, is level. If the horizon is not level, you're going to lose out because it means you're going to have to straighten and you're going to lose some of your width. I'm ready to go. One more setting is you make sure that your shutter mode, that is whether you're shooting in single or continuous low or continuous high, you make sure that it is on continuous low. But if it's set to single shot, it'll only take one photo. Remember, you're taking a series of photos, so continuous low is all you need, just to tell the camera, just keep taking photos. So now, let's set up our timer. and our timer will dictate how many photos that we take. Now, I said I might stop it at 7 or 7:30. The beauty with this is I can come out here, and if I see by 7 o'clock that it's totally clouded over, I go like, okay, I can shut it off. I said my minimum shutter speed is going to be 1 second. I choose the interval on here and the amount of shots. So what I do is I turn it on. Now, of course, it'll have to be plugged in, but just for now, I'll show you. So I turn it on. We have the delay. We don't want delay. We have long. We don't want long. We have the interval. And here's the key. The interval is how many seconds between each shot. So let's say I want a 6-second interval. Now, you would need at least 3 seconds for your camera to record the file. So it's got to take the photo, save it to the SD card, and then be ready for the next shot. If you think that, okay, well, I need 3.5 seconds between shots, then you count that 3.5 seconds. Remember, our minimum shutter speed is 1 second. That's 4.5 seconds. That's why I've gone to 6 seconds, because I've given myself at least 1 second. If I was worried that the camera could go above ISO 4000, so it means it's got to 4000 and it's going to drop down, I have two choices. I either increase my ISO or I make sure that I increase the length of time here, the interval. But I know I'm not going to get to ISO 4000 tonight. There's too much light, we're in suburbia. We're going to set it to 6 seconds. There, I hit enter. The next one here is how many shots do I want? These intervalometers, the cheap ones, they have a problem. It's the only drawback I've found. We can go from 1 to 999 or infinity. Infinity is just the 2 little bars, and that's what I normally choose. I choose infinity and I hit enter. That's it. It is all ready to go. I double check. I have infinity. If I want to, I could leave the camera run to 9 o'clock at night. I double check. My interval, 6 seconds. Long exposure is nothing. The delay is nothing. We're all set up. We could just plug it in. Now, normally if I'm out here, what I have is a couple of rubber bands and I clip it on here so it doesn't drop. The last thing I want is for this to be disconnected when it's just hanging down here, or have a little pouch that you can put all this in. Now, the one thing I forgot to show you is if I go into movie mode here on my camera, and you might be thinking, why are you going into movie mode when we're going to be taking photos? This is the easiest way to frame, because movie mode is 9:16. So I can look and go like, okay, perfect. This is what I want. Now I can go back into the photo mode. I framed it as I want my final time lapse to be. Get into the habit of going through this process, setting up your tripod, getting it in the angle. Now everything's ready to go. All I have to do now is press the start button, and you're going to hear it click every 6 seconds. Can you hear it? Beautiful. I know it's going to work. Now I'm going to set it up how I want it to be, because it's too low. So you can see how high the camera is now. This way I'm going to get a very nice view. Now I did say to use a pouch. I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to put my timer remote in this pouch here. So we're going to set it up. We just click start. I put my timer remote in this little pouch here, zip it up and put it there. And it's going away. You can hear it. Ka-ting. That's it. It's 5:45. Once it's all finished, I'll go back into my office. I'm not going to walk you through how I edit the photos because that's taking quite a bit of time, but I'll show you what the time-lapse looks like. Edited in Adobe Lightroom, and then edited in Adobe Lightroom and LRT time-lapse, because this is the big issue with Adobe Lightroom. Adobe Lightroom is a great photo editor, but when it comes to shooting time-lapses, it doesn't have that soothing function between the images, whereas LRT time-lapse, it runs its programs through and it will soothe out. So if some of the exposures are a little bit higher or a little bit lower, it'll just soothe it out. Adobe Lightroom doesn't give you that option, but I'll show you the two results. So it was pretty late last night by the time I finished doing the time lapses. Where the next day, yesterday I said that I was going to edit the images in Adobe Lightroom and a duplicate set in Adobe Lightroom and LRT time-lapse. If you haven't heard of LRT time-lapse, it is an editing program just for editing time-lapses, and it works with Adobe Lightroom. I'll put all the link in the description below if you want to check it out. If you're into time-lapses, this is definitely a program to use. Before I show you the images, I want to show you the differences between using an ultra-wide angle lens and using a kit lens when you're doing time lapses. Because if you're just wanting to sort of see if you like time lapses, you might want to spend $300 or $400 in a second-hand lens like the Tokina 11-16 or the 11-20 lens to shoot time lapses. You might say, well, I've got my kit lens, the 18-55. I'm going to show you a couple of images here to show you the differences between using an ultra-wide angle lens and using a kit lens. So this photo is from the Tokina 17-35mm full frame lens at 17 mils, which equates to about 11.5mm on a crop censored camera. This is cropped now to 16:9. Remember, when we're doing a time lapse, we're going to lose a bit of the top and a bit of the bottom because it has to be cropped to movie mode, which is 16:9. Now, this is at 18mm crop sensor. Can you see how much we've lost on the edges? But that's not all. Wait till you see what happens when we crop it to 16:9. This one now is cropped to 16:9. Now let's look at the differences. So this is at 11.5 millimeters if you're using a crop censored camera, and at 18 mils if you're using a crop censored camera. Can you see the difference between using an ultra wide angle lens for doing time lapses and an 18mm kit lens? I just want to show you the differences between an ultra wide angle lens and a kit lens when you're going to do time lapses. Now let's see the differences between a time lapse just edited in Adobe Lightroom and in Adobe Lightroom with LRT time-lapse. This time-lapse was just created in Adobe Lightroom. It doesn't look too bad at the start, but just pay close attention towards the end of the time-lapse and you will see quite a bit of flicker as it gets darker. You see, like it's looked like it's stuttering? That's because it's just jumping from frame to frame. And this is the big problem with just creating in Adobe Lightroom. And look at the end here. Can you see all that flicker? Did you see that sort of flickering through? That is the problem because it cannot average out all the frames. So it's just like a slideshow taken in video format. So it's just juttering from one frame to another. Now let's take a look at the one created in Adobe Lightroom and LRT time-lapse. Look how smooth it is. You see there's no flickering at all. It's slowly getting a bit darker, but there's just no flickering. There's no banding. This is why I say if you're really interested in doing time lapses, you should look at buying this program. The main purpose of this video was to show you how to use an external intervalometer to shoot a time lapse, digital SLR or mirrorless camera or hybrid camera, because like I stated, sometimes the inbuilt intervalometers on your cameras don't work that good. And I used to prefer using an external intervalometer until I bought the Z6 II. And I've already done a video on how to use the inbuilt intervalometer on the Z6 II. So this was part 2 to show you that if you don't have this function, or if you find that it's just too complicated for you, the easiest way is just to use one of these external intervalometers to do a time lapse. So thank you for watching. If this video has helped you, give it a big thumbs up. Stay safe, enjoy photography no matter what type of photography you do. Have fun in shooting time lapses, and I'll see you next time.